My name is Brooke, I'm 28 years old. And what happened on my birthday changed the way I looked at family forever. If you love real-life stories of strength, betrayal, and sweet, unexpected revenge, make sure to subscribe and stay till the end, because this one took everyone by surprise. Now let me take you back to that night, my 28th birthday. The evening was perfect, or at least it started that way. The lights in our family house glowed warm against the night, laughter filled the living room, and the smell of cake and champagne hung in the air. I had spent weeks planning the event, trying to make it simple but elegant, a dinner with family and a few close friends. But from the moment my brother, Ethan, walked in, I knew something was off. He was late. He was already tipsy. And he had that smirk, the one that meant he was looking for trouble. "Look at this," he said loudly as I greeted him. "Little Miss Perfect throws herself a fancy party." Again, I forced a smile. "Nice to see you too, Ethan. You could have just said happy birthday." He scoffed, grabbing a glass from the table. "Happy birthday to the golden child, the family's pride. The one who gets everything." Everyone laughed awkwardly. My parents tried to wave it off. Mom nudged him playfully, saying, "Ethan, don't start. Tonight's about your sister." But I saw the way Dad looked at me, not with concern, but with that same subtle annoyance he always had whenever Ethan acted up. Like somehow his anger was my fault. Dinner went on, tense and awkward. Ethan kept drinking, kept making little jabs about how some people are born lucky. When I blew out the candles, he clapped mockingly. "Make a wish, Brooke. Maybe wish for humility." I wanted to disappear, but instead I smiled and thanked everyone. I wasn't going to let him ruin my day. Until he did. It happened so fast it almost felt unreal. I was talking to my best friend, Harper, near the piano when Ethan suddenly stood up, glass in hand. "Everyone listen," he shouted, his voice cutting through the music. "Let's toast to Brooke, the superior one." Froze. Before I could say anything, he lifted his glass, sneered, and threw the champagne straight at me. Gasps filled the room. Cold liquid ran down my face and into my dress. For a second no one moved. Then Dad rushed toward Ethan, not to stop him but to hug him. "It's okay," Dad said, rubbing his shoulder. "He just needs to let it out. Let it out." I stood there, soaked, shaking, humiliated, and my father comforted him. Mom grabbed a napkin and whispered, "Don't make it worse, Brooke. He's been under stress." I laughed, but it came out broken. "I'm under champagne, Mom." She glared at me, whispering sharply, "Not now." Ethan smirked from behind Dad's shoulder, his voice dripping with spite. "That's the price you pay for acting superior." Everyone avoided my eyes. Even my parents. I looked around the room, at the guests who pretended not to see, at my brother still standing there proud, and at my parents who chose silence. So I stayed quiet too. I walked upstairs, changed into something dry, came back down, and thanked everyone for coming as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. And later that night, when everyone went to bed, I sat by the window, staring into the dark. They thought I'd just swallow it like I always did. They thought silence meant surrender. But this time it meant strategy. Because what no one knew was that I had something planned. Something Ethan and even my parents would never see coming. By 9:30 a.m. the next morning, they would realize that their actions had consequences. And by then it would already be too late. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house finally settled into that heavy, ordinary quiet, I sat on the edge of my bed and replayed the party in my head. The way the champagne felt cold and sharp as it ran down my face. The way people had looked at me like I was the awkward costume at someone else's play. The worst part wasn't the drink. It was that my own father had hugged the person who threw it. My hands went straight to my phone and hit record. I recorded a short message for myself, a voice memo I knew I'd need later. Date, time, what was said, how each person reacted. It felt petty in the moment, but documentation is a strange bomb. It makes memory into something actionable, rather than something that eats you from the inside. Harper had been there. She was the one who'd helped me plan the party and who'd nearly come to me after the champagne incident before she'd been cut off by our parents' frantic attempts to smooth things over. When the house quieted, I texted her. "Can you come over tomorrow morning? Coffee." She replied with 3 coffee emojis and an exclamation point. I slept for 2 hours, then woke up at 4 a.m. There's something about the world in those hours. It's small and honest and doesn't allow for excuses. I made strong coffee and put together a plan that felt like the only honest thing left to do. Make the choice visible. Not to humiliate, but to show truth where everyone preferred fiction. First, I collected the evidence I already had. My phone video of Ethan's outburst. Shaky, raw, unforgettable. Harper had taken a few photos when the glass hit, and dozens of people had been there. If they were willing, their messages could confirm what happened. I also remembered faces. A neighbor who always lingered at family events, the cousin who had been standing near the piano. People who'd seen but chosen the easy route. Silence. Second, I made phone calls. I don't mean the kind where you threaten or yell. I mean the careful calls to those who cared about fairness. I texted my aunt, the one who'd once told me privately during a holiday that she admired my work ethic. I wrote to one distant cousin who'd always been blunt and fair. I sent Harper a message asking if she'd stand by me. They all said yes. Not yes in a breathless, performative way, but yes in a quiet, that's it'll help kind of way. That steadied me. Third, I thought about timing. If I wanted them to feel the truth as a living thing, not as a rumor to be smoothed, I had to force a conversation in a public but controlled space. It couldn't be a vicious spectacle. I wanted accountability, not revenge masquerading as a show. So I decided to set up something that would require them to face what had happened, but in a context where guests could see the truth and speak to it. A small brunch the following weekend. Not at their house. Not at mine. At a community cafe where everyone would be neutral. I sent RSVPs to the friends and family who'd been at the party, and a few neighbors who'd seen the aftermath. I phrased the invitation carefully. A casual brunch, let's reconnect. I'd like a few moments to speak. That last line felt honest and deliberately ambiguous. It allowed people to show up without feeling hunted, and it allowed me the chance to say what needed saying with witnesses present. I also took a practical step that felt oddly liberating. I emailed a copy of the video to myself and Harper and uploaded a backup to the cloud with a timestamp. It's not because I wanted to wield it like a weapon. It's because I knew memory is slippery and people can claim I'd staged something. A time-stamped backup is the adult version of, I swear this is true. I told no one about the backup except Harper. Confidence, I decided, would be my ally. The morning of the brunch, I wasn't nervous. I was resolute. I had rehearsed what I'd say until the words felt like an old coat I could slip on. I wanted to be concise and clear. Describe the moment, state what people did, explain how it made me feel, and then ask for a response. Nothing theatrical. No demands for punishment. Just the truth, laid out with witnesses who cared enough to listen. When guests arrived, the room hummed with small talk. I watched their faces, some hesitant, some curious, some friendly. My parents came late, the kind of late that says you wanted to make an entrance. Ethan arrived last. Hair still a little mussed from the night before, eyes a fraction too bright. I waited until the coffee had been poured and the first plate of croissants had been passed. Then I stood. Thank you for coming, I began. I wanted to bring everyone together because what happened at my party last week still feels unresolved. My voice was steady. I know missteps happen, but I don't believe silence should be one of them. Few people shifted. I felt Harper's hand find mine under the table. He squeezed. I showed the video. It was short, raw, the sound of a room, the shout, the splash. For a beat, nobody said anything. The cafe felt enormous and intimate all at once. I watched faces shift, watched jaws tighten. The footage did what I hoped it would do. It made denial harder. People didn't explode into condemnation. They murmured, they made soft sounds. My dad's face drained of color. Ethan's jaw clenched. Someone, my aunt, stood up and said quietly, "That was unacceptable." Not performative. Not loud. It was a hinge turning. We didn't have a trial. We had an honest conversation. My father apologized, haltingly at first, and then more directly when other voices echoed the hurt I'd felt. Ethan's apology was messy. He said things about stress and how he'd felt compared to me, about childhood resentments that had festered into something ugly. Some of it was explanation, none of it was excuse. Afterward, outside the cafe, a neighbor hugged me and told me she'd seen the look on my face that night and hated that she'd stayed silent. She said she'd rather be uncomfortable and speak up than be comfortable and complicit. That small statement felt like the true victory. It wasn't in watching someone stumble. It was in changing the room's rules, from silence to accountability. I didn't relish people's discomfort. What I wanted was the repair of a reality where I wasn't invisible in my own life. The brunch didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the memory of champagne in my hair. It didn't make my father a different man overnight. But it shifted the axis so that when similar moments threatened to happen again, the social cost would be real. When we left the cafe, my parents were quiet. In the car, Dad reached across and took my hand for a moment. It was a small thing, but it meant something. He didn't try to paint over what happened. He simply said without flourish, "I'm sorry, Brooke. You didn't deserve that." I listened. I let him mean it. That's not the same as trusting him completely again, but trust, like any currency, can be rebuilt if both parties invest. At home later that evening, I replayed the day in my head and thought about the way quiet can become a strategy for justice. There's a misconception that revenge must be loud or malicious. Sometimes it's simply setting boundaries and making sure other people live with the consequences of their choices. Sometimes it's protecting your dignity by refusing to let others rewrite the story. I knew there would be fallout. Families are tangled. Apologies don't erase years of habit. But for the first time in a long time, I slept without that tight, tremoring ache in my chest. I'd asked for a conversation, and I'd been heard. That felt like more than victory, it felt like a new beginning. The days after the brunch were quiet, almost too quiet. It's strange how silence can change shape depending on who holds it. A week before, it had felt like punishment, like the whole house had conspired to mute me. Now that same silence felt like control. For the first time in a long while, my phone didn't buzz with fake apologies or forced small talk. My mother, who had said little at the brunch, began texting every morning. "Hope you're okay. Breakfast. We need to talk." I didn't reply immediately. I'd learned that distance isn't always revenge. Sometimes it's recovery. Then, one afternoon, Dad showed up at my apartment. No warning, no call. Just a knock. When I opened the door, he stood there holding a paper bag from my favorite bakery. Croissants, the good kind, the kind he used to buy when I was little. For a moment, I saw not the man who had hugged Ethan at my expense, but the one who used to cheer the loudest at my school plays. He didn't ask to come in. He just said quietly, "I don't expect forgiveness." But I needed to say, "I'm ashamed of what I allowed." I didn't interrupt. I watched him search for words, fumbling like someone trying to rebuild something he himself had burned. "I thought I was keeping peace," he continued. "But I was feeding cruelty. You didn't deserve that. And I don't deserve to be your father if I can't face that." It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the damage. But it was the first time he'd looked at me as an equal, not as the daughter who could be dismissed for the sake of family harmony. That mattered. He left the bag on the counter and went home without forcing a hug or a promise. I sat there staring at it for a long time before finally tearing into one of the croissants, warm and flaky. I cried while eating it, a ridiculous human mixture of forgiveness and fury. Meanwhile, Ethan stayed quiet. He hadn't texted, hadn't called. But the family grapevine was alive. A cousin told me he'd stopped showing up to dinners and that he was embarrassed. I didn't feel joy in that. Embarrassment fades too easily. I wanted him to grow, not to hide. Still, one evening I got an email from him. The subject line: "I finally watched the video. The body. Brooke. I don't know what came over me that night. I wanted to humiliate you because I thought that would make me feel less like a failure. Didn't. Just showed everyone who I really am. I don't expect you to reply. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. And thank you for showing the truth. I read it twice. Then I closed the laptop. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because silence this time was peace. Sometimes closure isn't a conversation. It's the decision to stop carrying someone else's shame. Over the next few weeks, small ripples began to form. People who'd once tiptoed around me suddenly became warm. My aunt started calling more often. My mother, cautiously but sincerely, began trying to include me in family decisions again. Only now I made sure every yes I gave was deliberate. No more pleasing. No more pretending. Then something unexpected happened. A message request popped up on my Instagram from an old family friend. One who'd been at the party but had never said a word. Brooke, I just wanted to say I admired how you handled everything. You showed strength without cruelty. I've been thinking about how often I let things slide in my own family. Your story made me realize silence isn't kindness. Thank you. That message hit me differently. It wasn't praise I craved. It was understanding. Maybe that's what revenge stories often miss. That true power isn't in seeing someone else fall, but in seeing yourself rise without apology. Still, life has a way of testing your new balance. A few months later, my parents invited everyone to a family barbecue. My instinct was to say no. The memory of champagne and shame still hung somewhere behind my ribs. But Harper said, "Go. Show them you're not living in their past version of you." So I went. When I arrived, there was laughter, music, and an almost desperate politeness in the air. My dad waved me over immediately. Ethan stood by the grill, quieter than I'd ever seen him. The sight of him didn't make me angry anymore. Just calm, distant, like a storm that had already passed. He looked up and met my eyes. "Brooke," he said softly. "Can we talk?" We stepped aside near the fence. He rubbed the back of his neck. "You don't have to forgive me, but I wanted to tell you I started therapy. I've been trying to figure out why I needed to tear people down to feel okay." He nodded. "That's good, Ethan." He hesitated, then added, "You made me look in a mirror. I hated it at first. But I needed it." That moment, short, raw, unadorned, was the real ending to what had begun that night at my party. I didn't need an apology wrapped in theatrics. Just truth. It was enough. Later, as I left, my father hugged me. My mother, too. There was no overcompensation this time. Just a quiet, honest kind of affection that comes when people realize you're not their extension anymore, but your own person entirely. Driving home, windows down, city lights blurring past, I felt the weight lift. Not because I'd won, but because I'd refused to stay small. That night had taught me that revenge doesn't always have to be loud or cruel. Sometimes it's the quiet act of refusing to play by the old rules. Sometimes it's simply making sure the truth stands, even when no one wanted to see it. And maybe that's what strength really is. Not the ability to destroy, but the courage to be seen. After that barbecue, life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it finally felt mine. The chaos that once lived rent-free in my chest began to fade, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years. Peace that wasn't dependent on anyone's approval. I poured myself into my work. A few months later, the design agency I co-owned with Harper landed its biggest client yet, a luxury real estate firm. It was the kind of project that would put our names in circles we'd only dreamed of before. Long nights, countless drafts, and endless cups of coffee later, our presentation was chosen over 5 competing agencies. When the news broke, my dad sent a simple text. "Proud of you." Just that. No strings, no excuses. And strangely, it was enough. By then, I'd learned to accept small things as victories. I didn't need grand gestures or dramatic reconciliations. Sometimes growth means learning that peace doesn't always arrive wrapped in apology. It often sneaks in quietly, after the noise has died down. One evening, as I sat by my apartment window, the same one where I'd once cried over being humiliated by my own family, I realized something important. That night hadn't broken me. It had revealed me. The woman who'd stayed silent that evening wasn't weak. She was gathering strength. And when she finally acted, it wasn't to destroy, but to reclaim. I began writing more. Not for an audience, but for myself. About power, family, control, and how sometimes the ones who love us the least are the ones who teach us the most. I turned those journal entries into short essays online. To my surprise, they began to go viral. People, mostly women, shared their own stories beneath each post. Stories of betrayal, survival, and the quiet, graceful ways they'd chosen themselves over and over again. It became a community, a kind of healing circle I never expected to start. For the first time, my pain served a purpose. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected call. A publishing company had come across my writing and wanted to discuss turning it into a book. First, I hesitated. Did I really want to reopen all those wounds on paper? But something inside me whispered, it's not reopening them if they've already healed. So I said yes. Months later, when The Art of Silent Revenge hit the shelves, it became something beyond me. People didn't just read it, they felt it. It wasn't a story of vengeance. It was a map out of heartbreak, a way to reclaim one's voice without shouting. One afternoon, while signing copies at a small bookstore downtown, I saw my father at the back of the line. He was holding the book in his hands, eyes glistening. When he finally reached me, he said quietly, "I've read it 3 times. You were right about everything. I'm proud, not of what you've done, but of who you've become." I smiled softly and said, "You helped build that, you know. In your own way." He nodded, no defensiveness this time. Just humility. And for the first time in a long time, I believed his pride was real. Thing came too. He waited until everyone left, then placed a small box on the table. Inside was a bracelet. Gold, simple, engraved with one word, peace. "I don't expect you to wear it," he said. "But I wanted you to have it." I took it in my hand, looked at him and said, "Thank you." No bitterness, just closure. That night, as I walked home under the city lights, I thought about how revenge stories often end with explosions, with dramatic falls and shattered glass. But mine didn't. Mine ended with silence, honesty, and the courage to walk away, to rebuild without rage. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't destruction. It's evolution. It's when the person they called too emotional, too dramatic, or too weak becomes someone they can't stop admiring, or regretting they ever underestimated. It's when your success becomes the mirror they can't look away from. And as I closed my apartment door behind me, I smiled. Not the polite smile I used to wear around family. Real one. The kind that comes when you know you've finally rewritten your story, and no one else holds the pen. 5 years later, I stood in front of the same family house where it had all begun. The same walls that had witnessed my humiliation, the same driveway where my brother once threw champagne at me while everyone laughed. Only now everything looked smaller. Not physically, but in weight. Life had changed me in ways that house never could. I had built my own company, a creative agency that mentored women trying to rebuild after personal or professional betrayals. What started as pain had turned into purpose. The book had done more than I ever expected. It wasn't just a bestseller. It became a movement. And now, my parents were hosting their 40th wedding anniversary. They'd invited me. Not out of obligation, but out of genuine effort. Dad had softened Mom too. The years had humbled them in quiet, necessary ways. My brother, Ethan, had matured as well, running his own small business now, surprisingly grounded. As I walked up to the house, the same maid who'd once whispered gossip about me years ago greeted me warmly, almost nervously. "Miss Brooke. It's so good to see you again," she said. Smiled kindly. "It's just Brooke now." Inside, laughter filled the air, the kind that wasn't cruel this time. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own family. Dad spotted me from across the room and immediately came over. "I was worried you wouldn't come," he said softly. "I almost didn't," I admitted, "but I figured it's time we closed the gap." He nodded slowly, eyes shining. "You've done well, Brooke. Better than any of us imagined. We should have seen that earlier." I smiled, not with resentment but peace. "You see it now, that's enough." Later in the evening, my mother pulled me aside. "I kept every article, every feature about your company," she said. "Your father may never admit it, but he reads your interviews out loud. He says, 'That's my daughter.'" I laughed softly. "He used to call me dramatic." "He still does," she said with a grin. "But now he says it with pride." As the night carried on, I sat outside for a moment, breathing in the quiet. The house's garden lights flickered softly. I could still picture that night. The shouting, the champagne splashing down my dress, the pitying glances from guests who thought I'd been put in my place. They didn't know that was the night I began building a new version of myself. Ethan joined me outside. He looked different, calmer, older, more human. "I've wanted to say something for a long time," he began, his voice sincere. "That night, I was jealous. Not because of what you had, but because you didn't need anyone's approval to shine. I thought I could dim you down to feel bigger. I was wrong." I didn't interrupt. He looked me straight in the eye. "You were the strong one, Brooke. Always were." For a moment, I saw not the arrogant brother who'd embarrassed me, but the boy who'd once built forts with me in the living room and fought imaginary dragons with plastic swords. We'd both grown, painfully, imperfectly, but grown nonetheless. He nodded. "Apology accepted." "Truly," he smiled. "You really wrote your own ending, didn't you?" "I just stopped letting other people hold the pen," I said quietly. That night as I drove back home, city lights stretched endlessly ahead. Bright, alive, unjudging. I thought about the younger me, the one who used to sit by her window crying after family dinners, wondering why she wasn't enough. If I could talk to her now, I'd say, "You were always enough." They just weren't ready to see it. My phone buzzed with a message from Harper. "The Foundation's website just hit 1 million visitors. You did it, B." I smiled and typed back. "We did it. Always." And as I looked out the window at the skyline, I realized, revenge had never been the goal. It had only been the beginning. What I really wanted was freedom. From expectation, from comparison, from needing anyone's approval. Now I had it. Because the truest form of revenge isn't payback. It's peace. And peace, when it finally arrives, doesn't roar, it whispers.